The courtroom was silent, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Rows of wooden benches creaked as people shifted in their seats, anticipation hanging heavy in the air. Reporters with notepads and cameras occupied the front rows, their pens poised to capture every detail. Behind them sat ordinary citizens, some curious, others angry, and a few hopeful. This wasn't just another trial. It was a story that had gripped the nation, sparking debates about justice, power, and prejudice. At the center of it all was Maya Thompson, a young woman whose life had been turned upside down by one fateful night. Just weeks earlier, she'd been an unassuming law professor at a local university, teaching students about constitutional rights and civil liberties. Her days were predictable: lectures, grading papers, and quiet evenings spent reading legal journals. But now, her name was splashed across newspapers and news channels, her face plastered on TV screens nationwide. The reason? She had crossed paths with two police officers who underestimated exactly who they were dealing with. It started innocently enough, or as innocently as these stories ever do. Maya had been driving home late one evening after a long day at work. Exhausted, she decided to stop at a gas station to grab a bottle of water before heading back to her apartment. It was a routine errand, something millions of people did every day without incident. But this time, things took a dark turn. As Maya pulled into the parking lot, she noticed a patrol car parked near the entrance. Two officers stood beside it, talking casually. She thought nothing of it until moments later, when flashing red and blue lights appeared in her rearview mirror. Confused, she pulled over, her heart beginning to race. Had she unknowingly broken some traffic rule? Was there an issue with her car? One of the officers approached her window, his expression stern. "License and registration," he demanded, his tone clipped and authoritative. Maya complied quickly, handing over the requested documents. As she waited, she couldn't help but feel uneasy. Something about the situation didn't sit right. When the officer returned, he asked her a series of questions. Where was she coming from? Where was she going? Why had she stopped here? Maya answered politely but grew increasingly frustrated as the questioning continued. Finally, she asked the question that had been nagging at her since the stop began. Why am I being pulled over? The officer hesitated for a moment before replying, "You match the description of a suspect we're looking for." That's when the tension escalated. Maya pressed further, asking for clarification. What description? All she knew was that she was black, female, and driving a car, a combination that seemed to fit far too many vague profiles used by law enforcement. Her voice remained calm, but her frustration was evident. She had studied cases like this in her classes, dissecting how racial profiling perpetuated inequality within the justice system. Now she was living it. The officer's demeanor shifted. He became defensive, accusing her of being argumentative. His partner joined him, adding pressure to the situation. When Maya tried to explain that she was simply trying to understand what was happening, one of them grabbed her arm roughly and ordered her out of the car. Humiliated and scared, she complied, knowing full well that resisting would only make matters worse. What happened next shocked even Maya herself. Instead of backing down or letting fear consume her, she looked the officer straight in the eye and said, "Do you know who my father is?" It was a bold move, perhaps born out of desperation, but also a calculated gamble. Maya's father, James Thompson, was no ordinary man. A towering figure in the world of civil rights law, he had spent decades dismantling corrupt systems and holding institutions accountable for discrimination. His name carried weight, not just because of his victories in court, but because of the respect he commanded from activists, lawyers, and politicians alike. For a brief moment, the officers seemed taken aback. Then, almost as if doubling down on their aggression, they arrested her. The charges, obstruction and resisting arrest. Both were laughable given the circumstances, but that didn't matter. Maya was handcuffed, placed in the back of a squad car, and driven to the precinct. The humiliation of being treated like a criminal for doing nothing wrong burned deep inside her. Hours passed before James Thompson received the frantic phone call from his daughter. By then, the damage had already been done. News of Maya's Arrest spread quickly thanks to bystanders who witnessed the scene and shared videos online. Social media exploded with outrage, hashtags calling for justice trending within hours. For many, this was yet another example of systemic racism and abuse of power by those sworn to protect and serve. When James arrived at the precinct, his presence alone sent shockwaves through the building. Officers who had previously acted with impunity suddenly found themselves on edge. James wasted no time demanding answers, his sharp legal mind already piecing together the events of the night. He secured Maya's release, but this was far from over. In fact, it was only the beginning. Back at home, Maya struggled to process everything that had happened. She replayed the incident in her mind, analyzing every word, every action, every decision made by the officers. It was surreal. She had spent years studying cases like hers in textbooks, discussing theoretical solutions in classrooms, and now she was living proof of the very injustices she taught about. The irony wasn't lost on her. If anything, it fueled her determination to fight back. Together, Maya and James began planning their next steps. They weren't just seeking justice for Maya. They wanted accountability. They wanted to expose the flaws in a system that allowed such blatant misuse of authority to go unchecked. With James's expertise and Maya's first-hand experience, they crafted a strategy designed to shine a light on the broader issues at play. This wasn't just about one bad encounter with two rogue cops. It was about challenging the culture of impunity that enabled them to act the way they did. Word of their plan spread rapidly, drawing attention from journalists, activists, and concerned citizens. Supporters rallied around Maya, sharing their own stories of mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement. Each testimonial added fuel to the fire, reinforcing the idea that this case represented something much bigger than one individual. Meanwhile, opponents worked tirelessly to discredit Maya, painting her as difficult or confrontational in an effort to shift blame away from the officers. Despite the mounting pressure, Maya refused to back down. Every insult hurled her way, every attempt to silence her, only strengthened her resolve. She immersed herself in preparing for the upcoming trial, poring over evidence, reviewing depositions, and consulting with experts. Late nights turned into early mornings as she poured her energy into ensuring that her voice, and the voices of countless others, would be heard loud and clear. By the time the trial date approached, the entire country was watching. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation, reporters jockeying for position as spectators filled every available seat. Everyone knew this wasn't just a legal battle, it was a moral one. And as Maya walked into the courtroom alongside her father, she carried not only her own hopes for justice, but also the collective dreams of those who believed in a fairer, more equitable society. This was more than a trial. It was a reckoning. The days leading up to the trial were a blur of activity for Maya and her father, James. While the world outside buzzed with speculation and debate, the two of them worked tirelessly behind closed doors, piecing together every detail of the case. James's office became their command center, a cluttered space filled with stacks of legal documents, photographs, and witness statements. Maps of the gas station where the incident occurred were pinned to the walls, marked with notes and arrows, highlighting key moments. Every piece of evidence mattered, no matter how small it seemed. James was in his element. For decades, he had fought against institutional racism, taking on cases that others deemed impossible to win. His reputation as a civil rights attorney was legendary, built on a foundation of relentless determination and an unshakable belief in justice. But this time, it wasn't just about winning a case. It was personal. This was his daughter they were talking about, and nothing could stop him from ensuring those responsible paid for what they had done. Maya, on the other hand, found herself navigating unfamiliar territory. She had always been a teacher, someone who analyzed laws and theories from a safe distance. Now she was living through the very issues she once discussed in classrooms. The transition wasn't easy. At first, she struggled to reconcile her academic understanding of systemic injustice with the raw emotions stirred by her own experience. Anger, fear, and frustration bubbled inside her, threatening to overwhelm her at times. Yet, she refused to let those feelings consume her. Instead, she channeled them into action, pouring all her energy into preparing for the trial. One of the biggest challenges they faced was gathering evidence. While bystanders had captured parts of the arrest on video, much of what happened between Maya and the officers remained undocumented. To fill the gaps, James reached out to experts in police procedure and racial profiling. He also tracked down witnesses who had seen or heard portions of the encounter, employees from the gas station, customers who had been nearby, even drivers passing through the area. Each new account added depth to their case, painting a clearer picture of what had transpired that night. Meanwhile, Maya took charge of reviewing depositions. Sitting at her father's desk late into the night, she carefully read through transcripts of interviews conducted with the officers involved. Their words made her blood boil. They spoke as if they had done nothing wrong, dismissing any suggestion of wrongdoing as mere misunderstanding. One officer claimed Maya had been uncooperative, while the other insisted the arrest was justified because she fit the description. It was infuriating, but Maya forced herself to stay focused. These were the same tactics used to justify countless acts of discrimination over the years, and exposing them was crucial to proving her point. As preparations intensified, so did the public scrutiny. The media coverage surrounding the case reached fever pitch, with reporters dissecting every development and commentators offering conflicting opinions. Some praised Maya for standing up to abuse, calling her a symbol of resistance against systemic oppression. Others attacked her character, accusing her of exaggerating the situation or provoking the officers. Online platforms became battlegrounds, with supporters and detractors clashing in heated debates. Death threats flooded Maya's social media accounts, forcing her to disable comments and tighten her privacy settings. Despite the hostility, she refused to retreat. If anything, the backlash only reinforced her resolve to see this through. The defense team representing the officers wasn't idle either. Knowing they were up against James Thompson, one of the most formidable lawyers in the country, they pulled out all the stops. Leaks to the press suggested Maya had been confrontational during the stop, implying she brought the trouble upon herself. Anonymous sources claimed she had a history of disputes with authority figures, though no concrete evidence supported these allegations. When questioned about the leaks, the department issued vague statements, neither confirming nor denying their involvement. Behind the scenes, tension simmered. James knew the defense would try to discredit Maya, twisting facts to fit their narrative. He prepared counter-arguments meticulously, anticipating every possible angle they might take. He drilled Maya on potential cross-examination questions, coaching her on how to remain composed under pressure. "Stay calm," he told her repeatedly. "Let your truth speak for itself." Despite the chaos swirling around her, Maya found moments of clarity. Late one evening, as she sat alone in her apartment staring at the city lights outside her window, she reflected on everything that had happened. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. It was about the young black men and women stopped for no reason other than the color of their skin. It was about the parents who feared for their children's safety whenever they left the house. And it was about holding institutions accountable, not just for her sake, but for future generations. With renewed determination, Maya threw herself back into the work. She spent hours researching similar cases, identifying patterns of misconduct and learning from past victories and failures. She reached out to activists and community leaders seeking advice and support. Together, they crafted a strategy designed not only to expose the officers' actions, but also to highlight the broader systemic issues at play. This wasn't just a courtroom battle. It was a chance to spark real change. Finally, the day of the Igbo trial arrived. The courtroom was packed to capacity, with spectators spilling into the hallways. Reporters jostled for position, microphones in hand, eager to capture every word. Cameras flashed as Maya entered alongside her father, their presence commanding immediate attention. Dressed in a simple yet elegant suit, Maya exuded quiet confidence. Her eyes scanned the room briefly before settling on the bench where the judge would preside. This was it, the moment she had been working toward for weeks. Opening statements set the tone early. The prosecution, led by James, painted a damning portrait of unchecked power and prejudice. He spoke passionately about the dangers of racial profiling, citing statistics and studies to illustrate its prevalence. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his voice steady but firm, "this case is not just about one woman or two officers. It is about whether we allow bias and fear to dictate how we treat each other, or whether we hold ourselves accountable to the principles of fairness and equality." The defense countered with technicalities, arguing that the officers had acted within their rights. They portrayed Maya as difficult and uncooperative, suggesting her behavior had escalated the situation unnecessarily. Their tone was measured, almost clinical, as if attempting to strip the incident of its emotional weight. But the jury listened intently, their expressions unreadable. Witness testimonies followed, each adding layers to the unfolding drama. Employees from the gas station recounted seeing Maya being treated harshly by the officers. Customers described hearing raised voices and witnessing the arrest unfold. One particularly compelling witness was an elderly man who had stopped to buy snacks when the incident occurred. With tears in his eyes, he recalled feeling helpless as he watched Maya being handcuffed. "It didn't look right," he said softly. "She wasn't doing anything wrong." Throughout the proceedings, Maya remained composed, her focus unwavering. She listened attentively as each witness took the stand, nodding occasionally when their accounts aligned with her memories. When it was finally her turn to testify, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to her as she walked to the stand, her steps deliberate and measured. Taking a deep breath, she began recounting the events of that night. Her voice was steady, her words precise. She described the initial stop, the aggressive questioning, and the moment she realized something was terribly wrong. As she spoke, her emotions surfaced briefly, but rather than weakening her testimony, they added authenticity. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the judge paused for a moment, visibly moved by her courage. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans. Activists held rallies urging the public to pay attention to the larger issues at stake. Social media lit up with hashtags supporting Maya, amplifying the call for accountability. For many, this trial represented more than just a legal proceeding. It was a turning point, a chance to demand better from the systems meant to protect them. As the trial progressed, the stakes grew higher. Both sides dug in, refusing to yield ground. The prosecution hammered home the message of systemic injustice while the defense clung to procedural defenses. Each argument, each piece of evidence brought them closer to the verdict that would define not only Maya's fate, but also the future of policing practices nationwide. For Maya, the journey had been long and grueling, but she had come too far to give up now. With her father by her side and the weight of countless stories behind her, she stood ready to face whatever came next. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in justice. And as she looked out, at the sea of faces watching her, she knew she wasn't alone. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation as the trial entered its most critical phase. After days of testimonies and arguments, it was time for closing statements, the final opportunity for both sides to sway the jury. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, scribbling furiously in notepads while spectators exchanged anxious glances. Everyone knew this was the moment that would define the outcome. James Thompson rose to his feet, adjusting his tie before addressing the jury. His presence commanded attention. Even those who had never met him could sense the weight of decades of experience behind his piercing gaze. He began softly, almost conversationally, drawing the jurors into the narrative he was about to weave. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice steady but brimming with conviction, "this case is not just about one woman or two officers. It's about something much bigger, a question we must all answer. Do we live in a society where fairness prevails, or do we allow fear and bias to dictate how we treat each other?" He paused, letting the words sink in. Then, step by step, he walked the jury through the evidence they had heard over the past weeks. He recounted the testimony of witnesses who described Maya's calm demeanor during the stop, contrasting it sharply with the aggressive behavior of the officers. He highlighted inconsistencies in the officers' accounts, pointing out how their stories shifted when questioned under oath. With every example, he painted a picture of abuse of power, a pattern of discrimination masquerading as law enforcement. James didn't shy away from emotion either. He spoke of the countless lives affected by racial profiling, sharing anecdotes, of families torn apart by wrongful arrests and communities scarred by mistrust. This isn't theoretical, he emphasized, his voice rising slightly. This is real. This happens every day across this country, and if we turn a blind eye today, it will happen again tomorrow. As he concluded, James turned directly toward the jury, his tone softer but no less powerful. You have the power to send a message, not just to these officers, but to everyone watching. You can say that justice matters, that accountability matters, that no one is above the law. The room was silent as he sat down, the weight of his words lingering in the air. The defense team followed, led by a seasoned attorney known for his ability to dismantle complex cases. Unlike James, whose argument relied on passion and principle, the defense focused on technicalities. They argued that even if mistakes were made during the arrest, they didn't rise to the level of criminal misconduct. These officers were doing their jobs, the lead lawyer insisted, pacing slowly in front of the jury. They received information about a suspect matching Ms. Thompson's description. They acted accordingly. Mistakes happen, yes, but does that make them guilty of wrongdoing? No. To bolster their case, the defense revisited the leaked narratives that had circulated earlier, attempting to cast doubt on Maya's credibility. They suggested she had provoked the situation, framing her polite questioning as defiance. At one point, the lawyer held up a blown-up image of the gas station parking lot, arguing that Maya's car placement might have obstructed traffic. A flimsy claim quickly dismissed by earlier testimony confirming the legality of her stop. Despite their efforts, cracks began to show in the defense's strategy. Their reliance on vague descriptions and procedural loopholes failed to address the core issue, whether the officer's actions were justified. As the lawyer wrapped up his closing statement, his voice grew louder, almost desperate, as if trying to drown out the doubts creeping into the minds of the jurors. When he finally sat down, there was a palpable sense that the prosecution had delivered the stronger argument. With closing statements complete, the judge instructed the jury on how to deliberate. The 12 men and women filed out of the courtroom, their expressions unreadable. Outside, reporters scrambled to capture reactions from supporters and critics alike. Activists gathered near the courthouse steps holding signs that read, "Justice for all" and "Accountability now." Social media buzzed with speculation, hashtags trending as people awaited the verdict. For Maya, the wait was excruciating. She sat beside her father in a small conference room adjacent to the courtroom, staring at the floor as the minutes ticked by. Her hands trembled slightly, though she tried to hide it. James placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We've done everything we can," he told her gently. "Now it's in their hands." Hours passed. The deliberation stretched longer than anyone expected, fueling both hope and anxiety among those following the case. Inside the jury room, debates raged. Some jurors leaned toward conviction, moved by Maya's testimony and the overwhelming evidence of systemic bias. Others hesitated, concerned about setting a precedent that might discourage officers from making tough decisions in high-pressure situations. Tensions ran high, but eventually consensus emerged. When the jury returned, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. Spectators craned their necks to catch a glimpse of the foreperson as he handed the verdict slip to the bailiff. The judge scanned it briefly, then nodded solemnly. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked. "Yes, Your Honor," the foreperson replied, standing. His voice echoed through the silent chamber as he announced, "On all counts, we find the defendants guilty." The room exploded. Cheers erupted from Maya's supporters, tears streaming down faces as strangers embraced in relief. For many, this was more than a victory. It was validation. Validation that their pain had been seen, their voices heard, their fight worthwhile. Maya herself sat frozen for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. Then slowly, she turned to her father, meeting his eyes. Neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. A lifetime of advocacy had culminated in this moment, and they shared it together. Outside the courthouse, the celebration continued. News crews captured images of jubilant crowds waving flags and chanting slogans. Maya stepped onto the steps, flanked by her father and a team of activists who had supported her throughout the ordeal. Microphones thrust toward her, reporters, shouting questions, but she raised a hand to quiet them. When she finally spoke, her voice carried strength and resolve. "This isn't my victory alone," she began, pausing to let the significance of her words resonate. "It belongs to everyone who has ever been told they don't matter because of the color of their skin. Today, we proved that courage and truth can stand against injustice. But our work doesn't end here. We must keep fighting for reforms, for accountability, for a future where no one has to endure what I did." Her speech electrified the crowd, reigniting calls for change. Across the nation, people watched replays of the moment, inspired by Maya's resilience. Politicians issued statements praising the verdict, promising to push for legislation addressing police misconduct. Community organizations launched campaigns aimed at educating the public about racial profiling and advocating for better training for law enforcement. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of the trial became evident. Police departments across the country faced increased pressure to implement reforms. Training programs focusing on implicit bias gained traction, funded by grants and public support. Lawmakers introduced bills designed to increase transparency and accountability within policing systems. For the first time in years, meaningful conversations about race and justice dominated headlines without devolving into partisan bickering. Maya found herself thrust into the spotlight, invited to speak at conferences, appear on talk shows, and meet with policymakers. She embraced the role cautiously, aware of the responsibility it carried. While she appreciated the recognition, her focus remained on effecting tangible change. Together with her father, she established a foundation dedicated to combating systemic racism and supporting victims of police brutality. Named after her mother, who had passed away years earlier, the organization provided legal aid, counseling, and resources to individuals navigating similar struggles. James watched proudly as his daughter transformed her trauma into purpose. Though he had spent decades fighting for justice, he admitted that seeing Maya take up the mantle filled him with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt before. "She's stronger than I ever was," he told friends privately, "and she's going to change the world." As the months went by, life began to settle into a new rhythm for Maya. Teaching still brought her joy, but now her lectures carried an added urgency. Students flocked to her classes, eager to learn from someone who had lived the lessons she taught. She encouraged them to use their knowledge not just to critique the system, but to actively work toward improving it. "Change starts with us," she often reminded them. "Every action matters." For the officers involved, the consequences were severe. Stripped of their badges and sentenced to serve time, they became symbols of accountability, a stark reminder that authority came with responsibility. Their downfall served as a warning to others in positions of power. Abuse would no longer be tolerated. Looking back on the journey, Maya realized how far she had come since that fateful night at the gas station. What began as a personal nightmare had evolved into a catalyst for transformation. She had learned painful truths about the world, but she had also discovered her own strength. More importantly, she had shown countless others that standing up to injustice wasn't futile, it was necessary. The verdict had sent shockwaves through the nation, but for Maya Thompson it was only the beginning of a new chapter. The courtroom victory wasn't just about holding two officers accountable. It was a call to action, a demand for systemic change that resonated far beyond the walls of the courthouse. In the days and weeks following the trial, Maya found herself at the center of a growing movement, one fueled by hope, outrage, and an unrelenting desire for justice. News outlets couldn't get enough of her story. Interviews poured in from every direction, Morning talk shows, primetime specials, international broadcasts. At first, Maya hesitated. She didn't want to become a celebrity or overshadow the broader issues at stake. But her father, James, encouraged her to embrace the platform. "This is your chance," he told her firmly. "You can amplify voices that have been silenced for too long." With his guidance, Maya agreed to share her story, but on her terms. Every appearance she made tied back to the larger mission: dismantling systemic racism and reforming policing practices. Her first major interview aired on a popular late-night show, watched by millions. Sitting across from the host, Maya spoke candidly about her experience, her voice steady despite the weight of the memories. She recounted the fear and humiliation she felt during the arrest, the frustration of being treated as guilty until proven innocent. But more than that, she talked about resilience, the strength she drew from knowing she wasn't alone. "I'm not special," she said earnestly. "What happened to me happens to so many others. The difference is I had resources and support. Most people don't." The audience erupted in applause, moved by her humility and determination. Social media lit up overnight, with viewers praising her courage and vowing to join the fight for justice. Hashtags like "Justice for All" and "Reform Now" trended globally, sparking conversations about racial profiling, police accountability, and institutional bias. Activists seized the momentum, organizing rallies and town halls to keep the dialogue alive. For the first time in years, it felt like real progress might be possible. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Maya worked tirelessly to turn attention into action. Together with her father, she launched the Evelyn Thompson Foundation, named after her late mother. The foundation aimed to provide legal assistance, counseling, and advocacy training to individuals impacted by discriminatory practices. It also partnered with community organizations to push for policy changes at local, state, and national levels. From hosting workshops on implicit bias to funding research on equitable policing strategies, the foundation quickly became a cornerstone of the reform effort. One of its flagship initiatives was a nationwide campaign called Truth and Transparency. Designed to hold law enforcement agencies accountable, the program advocated for body cameras, independent oversight boards, and public access to misconduct records. Maya traveled extensively to promote the campaign, speaking at conferences, meeting with lawmakers, and engaging directly with communities affected by police brutality. Her message was simple, yet powerful. We can't fix what we refuse to see. Not everyone welcomed the changes, however. Critics accused Maya of vilifying law enforcement, claiming her efforts undermined officer safety and morale. Some departments resisted implementing reforms, citing budget constraints or logistical challenges. Others argued that isolated incidents shouldn't define entire institutions. Online trolls renewed their attacks, flooding Maya's social media accounts with hateful comments and threats. One particularly vicious post read, "If you hate cops so much, maybe you should move somewhere else." But Maya refused to let negativity derail her mission. Instead, she leaned into the criticism, using it as an opportunity to educate. During a televised debate with a prominent police union representative, she addressed the concerns head-on. "I'm not anti-police," she clarified. "I'm pro-accountability. Good officers have nothing to fear from transparency. In fact, they should welcome it. It protects them as much as it does the public." Her calm demeanor and logical arguments won over even some skeptics, shifting the conversation toward solutions rather than blame. Back home, Maya balanced her activism with teaching. Her students noticed a shift in her lectures. They were sharper, more urgent, infused with real-world examples drawn from her experiences. She assigned readings on landmark civil rights cases, facilitated discussions about privilege and power dynamics, and challenged her class to think critically about the role of law in shaping society. "Knowledge is power," she often reminded them. "But knowledge without action is wasted potential." Inspired by her passion, several students joined her cause, volunteering with the foundation and participating in protests. One group even created a podcast highlighting stories of injustice and amplifying marginalized voices. Maya took pride in seeing younger generations step up, recognizing that sustainable change required collective effort. "This isn't my fight alone," she told her students repeatedly. "It belongs to all of us." As the months passed, the impact of Maya's work became undeniable. Lawmakers began drafting legislation addressing police misconduct, inspired by recommendations from the Evelyn Thompson Foundation. Cities implemented pilot programs testing alternatives to traditional policing, such as mental health responders and conflict de-escalation units. Training academies adopted curricula focused on cultural sensitivity and ethical decision-making. Slowly but surely, the tide was turning. Yet Maya knew there was still much work to be done. Systemic racism wasn't something that could be eradicated overnight. It was deeply entrenched, woven into the fabric of society. Undoing centuries of inequality required patience, persistence, and unwavering commitment. There would be setbacks, moments when progress seemed impossible. But Maya refused to lose sight of the bigger picture. Each small victory mattered. Each life touched by her efforts counted. One evening, as she sat in her apartment reviewing plans for an upcoming fundraiser, Maya reflected on how far she'd come. That fateful night at the gas station had changed everything, forcing her to confront truths she had once only studied in textbooks. It had tested her strength, pushed her out of her comfort zone, and ultimately transformed her into someone she barely recognized. A leader, an advocate, a symbol of resistance. Yet despite the accolades and recognition, Maya remained grounded. This wasn't about her. It never had been. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, she found her father standing there, a proud smile on his face. "I brought dinner," he announced, holding up a bag from her favorite restaurant. They sat together at the kitchen table, sharing a meal while discussing the latest developments in their work. As always, James offered advice and encouragement, reminding her to take care of herself amidst the chaos. "You're doing incredible things," he said warmly. "But remember, you're human too. Don't burn yourself out trying to save the world." Maya nodded, appreciating his wisdom. She knew he was right. Self-care was essential, especially when carrying the weight of so many expectations. Still, she couldn't shake the sense of responsibility driving her forward. Every email from a victim seeking help, every letter from a supporter thanking her for giving them hope, it fueled her determination to keep going. Later that night, unable to sleep, Maya stepped onto her balcony and gazed at the city skyline. Lights twinkled in the distance, each one representing a life, a story, a dream. Somewhere out there, someone was fighting their own battle against injustice, longing for a better future. And though she couldn't solve everyone's problems, she could offer them something invaluable. Proof that change was possible, that standing up to oppression wasn't futile, that courage and conviction could move mountains. As she stood there, wrapped in the cool night air, Maya felt a profound sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long and challenging, but she was ready. She had faced her fears, confronted her doubts, and emerged stronger because of it. Now, armed with experience, allies, and an unshakable belief in justice, she prepared to take the next step. The fight wasn't over, it was evolving. And Maya Thompson intended to lead the charge, one courageous act at a time. As the months turned into years, Maya Thompson's influence continued to grow, leaving an indelible mark on society. What had begun as a personal ordeal transformed into a nationwide movement, one that reshaped how people thought about justice, accountability, and equality. The ripple effects of her trial weren't limited to courtrooms or policy reforms. They reached classrooms, living rooms, and streets across the country, sparking conversations that challenged long-held beliefs and inspired action. The Evelyn Thompson Foundation became a beacon of hope for countless individuals who had felt powerless in the face of injustice. Its programs expanded rapidly, offering free legal clinics, mental health counseling, and advocacy workshops in underserved communities. One of its most impactful initiatives was Voices Unheard, a storytelling platform where victims of racial profiling and police misconduct could share their experiences without fear of judgment or retaliation. These stories, published online, and shared widely, humanized the statistics and headlines, reminding the world that behind every case was a person with dreams, fears, and a family who loved them. Maya herself remained deeply involved in the Foundation's work, traveling extensively to connect with those it served. She visited schools to speak with students about civic engagement, attended town halls to listen to community concerns, and met with lawmakers to push for legislative changes. Her presence brought attention to issues often overlooked by mainstream media, shining a light on systemic inequities that persisted despite progress. Yet, she never lost sight of her roots. Even as her schedule grew busier, she continued teaching at the university, ensuring her students understood the importance of using their education to make a difference. Her commitment to education extended beyond her classroom. Recognizing the need for accessible resources, Maya co-authored a book titled Courage Under Fire, Fighting for Justice in an Unequal World. Part memoir, part guidebook, the book detailed her journey from the gas station incident to the courtroom, victory and beyond. It included practical advice for navigating encounters with law enforcement, tips for organizing grassroots campaigns, and reflections on resilience and self-care. The book became a bestseller, praised for its honesty and actionable insights. Readers from all walks of life wrote to thank Maya for giving them tools to advocate for themselves and others. Despite her success, Maya faced ongoing challenges. Critics persisted in attacking her motives, accusing her of profiting from division or exaggerating the prevalence of racism within policing. Some even suggested she abandon her efforts altogether, claiming they created unnecessary tension between law enforcement and the public. But Maya refused to be deterred. Instead, she doubled down on collaboration, seeking common ground wherever possible. She participated in joint forums with police chiefs, union leaders, and community activists, fostering dialogue aimed at bridging divides. Though disagreements remained, these discussions planted seeds of understanding that would eventually bear fruit. One of the most significant victories came when Congress passed the Accountability and Equity Act, a landmark piece of legislation, inspired by recommendations from the Evelyn Thompson Foundation. Among other provisions, the act mandated body cameras for all officers, established independent review boards to investigate misconduct, and allocated funding for bias training programs. It also created a national database tracking disciplinary actions against law enforcement personnel, ensuring transparency and preventing problematic officers from moving between departments. When President signed the bill into law, Maya stood beside him on stage, her father watching proudly from the audience. For many, this moment symbolized not just policy change but cultural transformation, a shift toward greater accountability and trust. But Maya knew laws alone couldn't solve deeply ingrained problems. Real change required shifts in mindset, attitudes, and behaviors. To address this, she partnered with tech companies to develop educational apps and virtual reality simulations designed to immerse users in scenarios involving racial bias and ethical dilemmas. These tools were adopted by schools, businesses, and police academies, helping people recognize unconscious prejudices and practice empathy in high-stakes situations. Early feedback indicated promising results, with participants reporting increased awareness and improved decision-making skills. At the same time, Maya worked tirelessly to amplify marginalized voices, believing firmly that lasting change must come from within affected communities. She collaborated with grassroots organizations, providing grants and resources to empower local leaders. Together, they launched campaigns addressing issues like affordable housing, healthcare access, and criminal justice reform. By tackling root causes of inequality, they hoped to create environments where systemic racism could no longer thrive. For James Thompson, watching his daughter lead such monumental efforts filled him with immense pride. He often reflected on how far she'd come since that fateful night at the gas station. The frightened young woman pulled over for no reason had grown into a fearless advocate capable of inspiring millions. Yet he also recognized the toll the fight took on her. Late nights, constant travel, and relentless pressure weighed heavily, even if she rarely showed it. On quiet evenings, father and daughter would sit together, sharing stories and laughter, finding solace in each other's company. "You've done more than I ever dreamed," James told her once. "But don't forget to take care of yourself. Your mother would want you to." Maya nodded, grateful for his reminder. Self-care had become a priority, not out of luxury but necessity. She learned to set boundaries, carving out time for hobbies, meditation, and moments of stillness amidst the chaos. Friends and colleagues noticed a renewed energy in her, a sense of balance that made her advocacy even stronger. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, she approached it with confidence, knowing she wasn't alone. By the 5th anniversary of the trial, the landscape of policing and civil rights had changed dramatically. Body cameras were standard, issue misconduct records were publicly accessible, and independent oversight boards operated in nearly every major city. Training programs emphasized de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity, reducing incidents of excessive force. Communities reported improved relations with law enforcement, thanks in part to collaborative efforts fostered by initiatives like Maya's. While challenges persisted, the progress was undeniable. To commemorate the milestone, Maya organized a national summit titled Justice Reimagined, Building a Fairer Future. Held in Washington, D.C., the event brought together activists, policymakers, academics, and everyday citizens to celebrate achievements and chart the path forward. Keynote. Speakers included prominent figures from various fields, each sharing insights on how to sustain momentum. Maya delivered the closing remarks, her voice steady yet impassioned. "5 years ago," she began, "I stood outside a courthouse, overwhelmed by the weight of what we had accomplished. Today I stand here humbled by how far we've come, and inspired by how much further we can go. This isn't just my story, it's ours. Every voice raised, every hand extended, every step taken toward justice has brought us closer to the world we envision. A world where fairness prevails, where accountability is non-negotiable, where everyone, regardless of race or background, can live without fear." The crowd erupted in applause, tears streaming down faces as strangers embraced in solidarity. For many, the summit marked not an endpoint but a new beginning, a chance to redouble efforts and tackle remaining obstacles. As Maya stepped off the stage, surrounded by supporters and admirers, she felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. In the years that followed, Maya continued her work, adapting to new challenges and opportunities as they arose. She mentored young activists, encouraged innovation in advocacy strategies, and remained a steadfast champion for equity and inclusion. Her legacy, as both an individual and a catalyst for change, was secure. But more importantly, she had proven something invaluable, that courage, combined with conviction, could move mountains. And so, as history books recorded the events of her era, Maya Thompson's name appeared not just as a footnote, but as a testament to the power of resilience, determination, and collective action. Her story reminded future generations that even in the darkest moments there was always room for light, and that sometimes standing up to injustice wasn't just about winning battles. It was about building bridges to a better tomorrow.